Mustafa Farooq is the Executive Director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims, which, along with the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, has launched a court challenge to Quebec's Bill 21, banning the wearing of religious symbols by public servants in the province of Quebec who are in a position of authority. You see Mr. Farooq there, and he joins me now. Thank you for your time today. It's good of you to take time to speak with me about this.
No, thank you, Peter. Thanks for having us on.
Why are you taking the Quebec government to court over this new law?
Well, I think we are taking the Quebec government to court because we believe that second-class citizenship should not be a policy. We believe that this bill is unconstitutional. We believe that this bill strikes at the heart of our civil liberties that we believe in so strongly as a society, that we in Quebec have fought for generations, and that the people of Quebec have fought for generations. And that's why we're here with our allies, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, standing in solidarity with folks in Quebec who have been standing against Bill 21, and we're not standing down. We're going to stand up against Bill 21.
All right. You are a lawyer by profession. I think a Bill 21 includes the notwithstanding clause to override the Charter of Rights and prevents a challenge on the basis of human rights violations. So what's the legal argument you're making before the Quebec court to strike down this law?
Sure. So, I mean, we're going to obviously, you're going to hear more of our arguments when we get into court. But essentially, the notwithstanding clause exists to deal with questions about the Charter. But our Constitution is about more than just the Charter. There are a set of principles that we as Canadians have had in our Constitution before the notwithstanding clause. And essentially, it's on those same principles that Canadians believe in very strongly, that we are going to be making our challenge.
Is part of the argument that the notwithstanding clause can't be used in cases where it's being used as a shield to enact laws that, for instance, discriminate against one gender? So is that going to be part of the argument you plan to take before the court, that this law mostly affects, in many cases, Muslim women in the province of Quebec, and so it's attacking a gender?
So, I mean, you're gonna hear more of our legal arguments when we are in court, making this, taking on the Quebec government. But on your point about gender, I think it's important to note that this law affects more than just the Muslim community or Muslim women who wear the hijab. This affects, Jewish men, Quebec Jewish men who choose to wear the kippah. It affects Quebec Sikh men who choose to wear the turban. And when we really take the time to think about how it's possible that a government, in 2019, is limiting the right of the Jewish community, of the Quebec Jewish community, to wear the kippah. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me how this could even be considered, and how this is actually even passed. So we're here, we're going to stand up to Bill 21, and we're going to make sure that we level a strong legal argument against it.
I think you talk about it as being affecting a lot of different minority communities across the province of Quebec. And I think at your news conference today, I think we heard from a young Sikh woman who says this may shatter her dream of being a teacher in the province of Quebec. How common is her story in Quebec's minority communities?
Well, I mean, we've been hearing the story from, many folks now who are coming to us and telling us their concerns, who are talking to us about how, their fears, their greatest fears about not being accepted and not being included in this beautiful province have apparently been realized in this bill. And let's be clear, it's about more than a particular set of public sector jobs. This is about, this kind of, this act creates and is the amplification of a policy of the politics of division, which is intended to separate all of us. When you have the minister coming forward and talking about calling the police if you see somebody potentially violating this act, that's not something that happens when you have a neutral state trying to prevent dissension in our society. It's quite the opposite of that, because we know and we believe very strongly that a neutral state does not discriminate.
Right, but the government's argument is that, look, this is taking religion and religious symbols out of the workplace. Do you accept that?
Well, I mean, right now I'm wearing a wedding ring. It's unclear as to whether a wedding ring will or will not be a religious symbol. The minister has kind of equivocated on that position. And that just shows you the level of absurdity to this entire bill. when you have something like, as potentially what we might think as innocuous as a wedding ring potentially falling under this category, that demonstrates what happens when you bring in unconstitutional laws, when you bring in legislation like this that doesn't go through a process of parliamentary debate as it should, that fast forwards through the consultation process with affected communities, that strikes at the heart of everything that Canadians and Quebecers have fought for.
All right. So,
and in that sense,
but do you reject the government's argument, the government of Quebec's argument that look, we want to essentially neutralize the role of religion and religious symbols across the workplace, particularly with public servants who deliver services to people or who have a position of authority? What's wrong with that argument they're making?
So there's nothing wrong theoretically with the idea that we should all be neutral in our workplace. In fact, one could argue that's a strong policy position. But what's happening is that the Quebec government itself is coming in as religious arbiters. It's deciding whether, my beard, which, is or isn't a religious symbol. It's deciding whether long hair is or isn't a religious symbol. It's deciding whether a wedding ring is or isn't a religious symbol.
Who should decide that?
Sorry?
Who should decide that?
Yes.
Yeah, but who should decide it if not a piece of government legislation? That's their argument, that it's up to them to set this tone. If it's not a government doing it, should anybody do it?
No, and I mean, that's why we have a charter. That's why we have a constitution. We have these pieces that are inherent to our life, to our way of life, that governments don't invade people's personal ethics. They don't invade people's personal autonomy. That government is there to help us and protect us, but not to infringe on those core beliefs that we have that make us who we are. And when we're starting to strip away the essence of who people are, when we're pointing at people because of who they are and saying that person isn't welcome to be a teacher, that person isn't welcome to be a police officer, that is a serious problem for us as a country.
Okay, a couple of quick questions to finish here. At the last minute in this debate this weekend, the Quebec government amended the bill, you touched on it, to include measures for surveillance and enforcement. Inspectors who would actually ensure the law is being followed with the power to take disciplinary measures in some cases against workers who don't follow the law. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think one of the first part of the concerns is that it was introduced really at the 11th hour, and I think it speaks to the way that the Quebec government has brought forward this bill, that such critical amendments as potentially, and again, we're in the midst of our review of these amendments, but potentially creating circumstances where folks are potentially surveilling people in their workplace. That's something that's really concerning. When we think about the imposition of government power in a workplace and creating what some people have been calling a snitching procedure.
Okay,
I don't think that's something that most Quebecers feel comfortable with. That the colleague who's sitting next to me is considering potentially snitching on what I'm wearing today. I was wondering whether the scarf I'm wearing on my head is because I'm wearing it out of solidarity, because it's hot outside, or because I'm going through chemotherapy.
Okay, very quickly to finish, we're going to hear from the Justice Minister in a moment here. The federal government is taking the federal Justice Minister is taking kind of a wait-and-see attitude to take a closer look at the legislation as amended now and to see what happens next. Is that good enough for you? What do you want from the federal government?
Well, we are calling on all political leaders, including the Prime Minister, to continue to unequivocally state that Bill 21 is a flawed piece of legislation that causes division in our country. And we're calling on leaders of all political parties, nationally, provincially, and across Canada, to decry this piece of legislation as what it is.
Has the federal government provided any funding for your court fight, or do you want them to?
So not at this moment. They're not funding our court fight. Absolutely not. But that's entirely their prerogative in terms of how they should proceed in the court battle. But in terms of public discourse and in terms of public discussion, it is critical that every leader is leading and is coming out and saying, Canadians are here to bring each other together. We're here to hold each other. We're here to share food with each other. We're not here to divide each other. And it's certainly not a good use of a government's time when they're getting in and trying to regulate, what are people wearing today? That's just silly legislation.
Right.
It's unconstitutional legislation, and it's something that we are going to stand up and litigate in the courts.
All right, we'll follow the court battle. Mustafa Farooq, thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.